Today we're here to discuss whether it was problematic for Mr., who was much, much older, to want to marry Nettie in The Color Purple. As you may know, in the film and book, Mr., Celie's husband, originally wanted to marry Nettie, Celie's younger sister, but the girl's father wouldn't let him.
Older men taking much younger brides was quite common in the early 20th century when this story takes place. However, we must talk about this practice through the lens of today's sensibilities and ask the question of whether Mr. was wrong or simply doing what the norm was for that time, and was that wrong?
I'm Heit.
And I'm Cheri.
And you've discovered Axiom Amnesia.
A lot of you requested that we cover this film, and I can't wait for us to talk about it. But first, we want to thank all of the supporters who helped to make this video possible. If you want your name to appear alongside these contributors, make a one-time donation via Cash App or click the thanks button on this video, or you can head on over to patreon.com/Axiom Amnesia or become a channel member by clicking the join button to enjoy all of the benefits of becoming a monthly subscriber. This question really kind of came out of the idea that we had this discussion. Was Mr. wrong? Just to explain some context of exactly what happened in the film, we have Mr. who is a man probably in his 30s, I would imagine, at this point. Go to the comments and let us know if in the book they specify his age. It's been a long time since we've read the book, so I don't exactly remember that detail. But at any rate, we have Mr. who is making eyes at Celie's younger sister, Nettie, and she's a teenager who, and I would say a post-pubescent teenager. So it's not like she looks like a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old. She looks outwardly like a woman, right? But she is not an adult at this point. And so he comes to her father and says, "Hey, can I have Nettie?
I want to marry your Nettie."
You know, and obviously he's attracted to Nettie. And he's got this situation at home where his wife has died and he's got these kids who need raising and somebody to take care of the house.
I got nobody to watch over my youngins.
While he, basically he's a farmer and whatnot. So while he does his work in order to generate the revenue for his farm.
Can't let you have Nettie. She's too young.
Celie and Nettie's father is like, "Nah, you can't have Nettie, not now, not ever.
Nettie, you flat out can't have, not now, not never.
But you can have Celie, who is also still underage. But unfortunately, Celie has had two of her father, who she thinks is her father's children, who he is then given away. Right. We later find out in the film that this actually wasn't her father. It was her stepfather, the man her mother had married before the mother died. Now we have the situation where Celie goes and lives with this man. But the question is, was Mr. wrong for wanting to marry her in this time that the story is taking place, like in the early 20th century, or at any point later?
This really is a tough one. It's easy to say now, oh, it was just wrong. But I say it is wrong, right? And I think that the film makes it clear that it is wrong, perhaps, right? But I think that the idea was that she did not want to do it. It was about autonomy, right? That maybe it could be that a girl could have, some sort of autonomy and choose who she would want to marry.
Right. Right.
In those times.
And that wasn't really the deal that we saw for Celie or really Nettie in the Color Purple. And interestingly, Nettie has this whole African adventure when she goes away from, America as a result of getting kicked out by Mr. And then I can't help but feel like she never actually seemed to marry. Right. I don't think she married. Let us know in the comments if you think she did. But to give some better context, one of the things, because we all hear the stories of how our great-grandmother, our grandmother, and, people who were getting married at 13 and 14 and whatever years old. And it's almost like part of the folklore of it. So I said, well, let's try to find something that can put the past in proper context so that we can better understand this. And so I came across this article from the Colorado Public Radio, and I think we'll link it in the description, but I think you should actually read the article because it's very interesting how they discuss this notion of child brides, right? So I'll read a little piece from there. So the marriage of legal children, in fact, has been relatively common throughout U.S. history. The U.S. Census Bureau didn't link age with marital status until 1880, which makes national figures unavailable before that time. But in that year, 1880, 11.7% of 15 to 19-year-old girls were wives. The census didn't specify the exact age at marital status until 1910. And then that number dipped in 1890 and then increased incrementally through the 1920s to 12.6% in 1930. So youthful marriage decreased, as did the overall marriage rate during the Great Depression. So it then rose again dramatically after World War II, but it's been declining since the early 1960s. That said, people below the age of 18 continue to marry to this day. A 2011 study published in the Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics estimates that about 9% of contemporary American women were married before they turned 18. And many of those women are now older, having married in the 1950s or 1960s. But they are not women of the distant past. They live among us right now today. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that the probability of marrying by age 18 in the contemporary United States is 6% for women and 2% for men. So then the article goes on to discuss like the idea that early marriage has been part of everyday life for millions of Americans. It also points to the people who are more likely to have participated in early marriage historically and even presently today. And those people tend to be people with difficult socioeconomic situations, right? So people who have less money, people who the family is motivated to go ahead and let that teen girl go to her husband because it would reduce the burden on the family to feed everybody, right? So the idea of how money plays into this as well. So to get back to The Color Purple, when you hear that and hear that there are people still today marrying, what are your thoughts about like right now versus back then?
I just think it's one of those same fights like with everything, right? When you got women's rights, you got black folks and all that stuff that went on. Because if you read stuff like Up From Slavery from Booker T. Washington and explaining his life and how basically as a kid he goes off and lives his own life, I think it was more common in those earlier days. And by the time we get to the turn of the century and then we get the Color Purple story, right, it's kind of that same thing. It shouldn't be like this, but it is still happening, right? And there's this push to have where children can be children in a sense, right? And it's probably still going on to this day. And, things like with Booker T. Washington and all the other kids, like child labor, it wasn't until like the late 30s where the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed, right? That basically like, hey, child labor is bad. You know what I'm saying? And if you compare that to like, women's suffrage and Civil Rights Act and all of those things, it's, fairly recent. So it just kind of points to what was going on, what is the sentiment, and that this idea that it was wrong, at least in terms of a republic, right? Mm-hmm. However that voting situation is set up, is that, okay, this is a ongoing thing. And you don't just get to where, okay, now we're looking at children as children and we're looking at black people as human and women as equals of men, and then say, okay, now it is over. So I would guess that, yes, it is still going on today because, it takes more than, you have to kind of try to change over what your culture is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in the broader, like the general American culture, we have seen that has changed. Fewer women are getting married younger. But the other part that we really have to also talk about is, like you mentioned, the whole aspect of sexism. If you're looking at women who were born in the 1800s, early 1900s, those women did not have the same opportunities as women today. And obviously you have to be taken care of. You think about a woman who might, even let's just say she wants to get married, right? As a child bride, if you will. Maybe she's 16 or 17 years old. She may be motivated in that way because she has no way to take care of herself, but she sees marrying this older man as a way to get out of her parents' house, right? And, depending upon what those circumstances are, whether, it's poverty, whether it's some other type of domestic things going on in the home. Whereas now, when women have been going to college for generations now, women, I'm thinking, hey, if you wait till 18, graduate high school, you can go away to college if the issue is just getting out of the home, right?
Yeah, so I think that's part of the whole push. Where I say, like, where children can be children, right, and women can have their own autonomy as well. Because even in this movie, we got the situation where one child goes to school, the other child isn't allowed to go to school, right? Mm-hmm. You can have an opportunity as a kid to grow up and be whatever you want to be in a society, right? Hey, maybe you want to get educated and learn this craft and, those sort of things where you don't have to immediately go to work because the family isn't making enough money, right? Or you need to be able to take care of yourself. But it ties into the economy, the economic system, and all of those sorts of things. And the same thing like with the child labor laws and the Fair Labor Standards Act is, kind of around the time where you're trying to get with the New Deal, and you had the Great Depression and all of that too, where you have to have some sort of an economic standing for people or financial ability to take care of themselves so that you can say your children should not be going to work, your daughters should not have to marry a man, right? Mm-hmm. There has to be opportunity.
And what about, like, what do you do if right now in 2024, we have this situation where your family is poor, let's say, and you don't have the money. Let's say you're growing up in some place that is where you're in a lot of poverty, or let's just say you're in Appalachia, where the living conditions and the poverty that you might see there or in other parts of the country, you just kind of have to do what you have to do to survive. And unfortunately, that doesn't lend itself to ideal conditions for anyone. But yet at the same time, it makes these children, young women, vulnerable to, the men who might be interested in marrying them at a young age.
Yeah. But so we kind of really only talked about it from the child and the woman's, or the child and the girl's standpoint. Mm-hmm. What about from the standpoint of men? Because I think if they had done a better job of showing Mr. in the movie of being of need, right? Where, okay, when children or boys are raised, they're not raised to be able to take care of the home and do all those other things, because back in those days you had what men do and you had what women do. So then when the wife dies or goes away, then you need to find someone who can take care of those things that you haven't been raised up to do and you're incapable of doing.
Yeah, at that point, because think about it, how Mr., even though he wanted to and tried to cook for Suge when she came to town, he burned everything up. He didn't know how to operate the stove, so he just didn't have good domestic skills, right? With the housework and anything else and how to care for children. That wasn't what he had been reared to do. So in a way, he was motivated to find a wife. But the question is, could he have found a wife that was his age? Yeah. Or did he need to find a wife who was, this teenager?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a discussion that's kind of going on today, where they talk about the modern woman and the women who say, I don't need a man. That's part of it, that even as a man, you should be able to not, from a perspective, I'm not saying this is what I believe, you should be able to not need a woman, right? Mm-hmm. Where you can still take care. That's part of it. But from my standpoint, it can be that what I can't do, this person can't do, and, a symbiotic relationship like everything else in existence, right, is that you can shore up, the woman shore up, or the man shore up these gaps in skills and abilities.
Right.
And I think that's kind of was somewhat could have been one of the ideas of marriage too. But see, when you have the situation where the society is trying to make it where, people can sustain themselves, which could just be a total capitalist endeavor, where, they can kind of sustain themselves, then you do get the situation where you don't really need the cohabitation or two people working together. But in this situation, over 100 years ago, right? Where, okay, they made it clear that I won't say these people, at least Mr. Albert needed somebody else to help take care of his house or whatever, because, he just couldn't do it.
Right. And I can't help but think about the way that things in modern times have changed. And one of the things I think that makes it harder for women, if you look at women, let's say from the early 20th century, those women didn't have the same opportunities outside of the home. If you did work outside of the home, maybe you could, be kind of like a housekeeper, or maybe if you were educated, you could be a teacher or something like that. But, all of the possible opportunities were not open to you as a woman at that point. And in addition to that, if you were a married woman, or if you had married young or whatever, you still typically had the responsibilities of domestic care of the home, regardless of if you worked outside of the home. And for many Black women throughout history, since slavery was over, and in the 1860s, had to work. So it wasn't that they all just got to sit home and only raise children. So not only do you have the responsibilities within the home for child rearing, if you had a husband and whatnot, but then you have still the burden of contributing to the household and making money outside of the house in order that the family can survive. And if you were alone and didn't have a husband, you had those same burdens, right? Whereas for the men, through time, it hasn't changed that, generally speaking, the expectation of the husband is that he would be providing, with work from outside of the home. And of course, you have husbands that cook and do all of these other domestic things. But generally speaking, the division of labor really hasn't changed all that much in time. Most women, like most working women who are married women who have a family and children, are trying to juggle raising the kids and going to work a 9 to 5.
And most of it is the economy that the people praise, right?
Yeah.
It's the economy that doesn't allow for there to be one income. So then it's, I need the so-called traditional woman, and I need you to bring in some money too, because I am unable to, right?
Right.
And then it becomes an indictment on the man too, that the man can't bring it in. So something must be wrong with him, when it's economy, or as I would say, capitalism.
Yeah.
And that's just the crux of it. And that's what all of these decisions throughout time have been. Because if you're talking about all this stuff and you're not talking about the economic system of the place and the people, then you're not really talking about what's going on and why people make the decisions, or are compelled to make the decisions, if we can even call them that they are making.
Yeah. And, we have talked about kind of from the perspective of why Mr. might be looking for a wife. Okay. But the next question is, because he chose a wife, and then I could think of possible reasons, forget who we know Mr. to be in the movie, possible reasons why an older man might be looking for a younger woman who, that don't include the obvious sexual aspect of that, right? If Mr's in his 30s, why might he not be looking for a 30-year-old woman? Well, number one, a 30-year-old woman, you might not be able to appease her or get her, let's say, with the same, because she's lived more life. She's going to be more wise, and married already,
time, right?
Exactly, for the time. So the pool of eligible women might, or teenagers might not be that. The second thing is that, this was a situation where Celie, and presumably if Nettie, if she had been allowed to marry him, didn't really have a choice about marrying him. Yeah. They were given to this husband, this man. Yeah. And
what's the population too of the area? So in the first movie, we see that the population seems to be the people at the church and when they all come together. But in the second one, it gives you an idea that this is a much bigger town.
And to be clear, because I know somebody's going to be like, you're justifying. No, actually, what we're trying to do, or what I'm specifically trying to do by playing devil's advocate here, is to say, let's explore all of the reasons. I mean, the obvious big reason, which I look at, and and if you've watched the other videos we've done, I find it absolutely repugnant that he wanted to marry this young girl.
But it's called analysis, right? When you look at someone's real life, when you look at books, movies, and characters, you look at why these characters are doing what they're doing. You don't just have an indictment of people because you would not agree with the decisions they're making, right? But even though at the same time, you can say, in my real life, I don't like these decisions, right? But you look at it from, why is the character doing? And that's all we're doing. It's, and why would this person do this, good or bad?
Right. And we know that most of you get this. But for the people in the back, this is why we're talking about this. So back to this notion of what are the possible non-nefarious reasons why a man like Mr. might want to marry a younger girl, a younger teen, or a teenager, as opposed to a woman who might be his age. Well, the other thing, I just think it's easy. And then by the time he decided to get a wife to come in and try to help, you saw the house, what it looked like when Celie came in. It was in shambles. Kids' hair ain't been combed in a year. Things were bad at that point. And even Mr.'s father was telling him, like, you got to get a wife up in here to take care of this and bring some order to your house. Like, if you didn't have a wife who was taking care of these things, then it was jacked up. And now I know modern people, and specifically women, we would look at it and go, can't he mop a floor? Can't he clean this? But the thing is, he could, and he could easily learn and come up to speed. But could he do that and go to the field and work?
That, and it has to be part of your routine too, right? Yeah. You may not even think of doing these things, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are things that some people just never think of doing in their life because it's just not what was done. Is not how you were raised. And if you were married for 10 years, the other person probably has been taking care of these things and you don't even realize what the other person is doing.
Yeah. Just as much as if there's this movie, I think it's called Places in the Heart, and it stars Sally Field, and it came out in the early 80s. And in that movie, the woman, and they live on a farm. Her husband is the farmer, and then her husband dies. And then she now has to try to take over the responsibilities of getting everything planted and whatever on the farm. And she had like a farmhand who happened to be Black, and people who would help. And the farmhand kind of knew a little bit of what to do. Like, we got to plant the seeds this way. Well, not a little bit. He knew how to kind of run those things. But here is this woman who is out in the fields trying to take over the role and responsibility that she hadn't been trained up for. And, the movie is about the drama of all of that and her trying to just, be able to grow this crop so she could have the money she needs to take care of her family. So truly, the way it worked back then was men and women had their particular responsibilities that were divided down the lines of gender roles. And you truly didn't know how to do what other people knew how to do. The other gender, right? You didn't know anything about necessarily completely running a farm from the aspect of how much to sell this or that for. Now, I would suppose that women who were in the rural South might know a little bit more about that. They may actually have done work where they were helping to grow or assisting or whatever.
Did we watch this movie?
Places in the Heart? The one I was just talking about?
Some movies, something like that.
We might have, but I mean, not anytime recently. I mean, I remember watching this movie as a kid, but I don't know that it's one. But yeah, Places in the Heart, starring Sally Field. She might have even gotten an Oscar for that. I don't remember. But, that is like sort of an example of the difficulties that a person might face. But we also just got to go ahead and call a spade a spade. In the case,
Danny Glover was in that movie.
Yeah, Danny Glover was the field hand in that movie. So look, we have looped that movie into the original Color Purple from 1985. And actually it was around the same time. So it was, but that was a great movie. But the thing is, we also have to just acknowledge that Danny Glover was nasty. Not Danny Glover. Let me take that back. I don't mean he was nasty. So Danny Glover played that role so well that it's almost like he was seamless for Mr. We've talked about how there were lots of people who said they couldn't stand him after this movie because he just played the role of Mr. so well. Mr. was nasty. We see the scene where he's got his eyes on Nettie, knowing that he already was interested in Nettie as his wife. You know, he could get the sexual benefits and he could have her taking care of his kids. I do wonder, like, would he have beat Nettie like he did Celie? You know, how would he have treated her as his wife? Because once again, you know, a lot of the burden that Celie bore as his wife was that he never really wanted Celie, but he said, hey, this is better than nothing. This is better than me having to cook my own food. This is better than me having to raise my own children in the domestic way.
That's a tough one, but I think of would Celie have been more happy if, you know, Nettie didn't leave?
I think Celie wouldn't have been well. Oh, you mean,
know what I'm saying?
So you mean if he married Nettie, then
no,
Celie?
If he married Celie and then the whole thing didn't go down and Nettie had still stayed there, right? Because you took the only one who loved me or whatever, right? Where you have some joy throughout your day, but other than that, it's just you serving this man and getting beaten and all that.
Well, there's somebody in the comments of one of the previous videos about this, or maybe it was in the poll question comment, said that Nettie could have bought herself some time if she had just gone ahead and basically gave it up to Mr. Now, when I saw that, I was just like, I know you joking. I know you lying.
Those are decisions people make daily, though.
And that's the hard part, because when, you know, because I was at first incensed, but when you think about it, people who have their back against the wall have to make all types of decisions to sustain just their ability to live. And it's really easy to talk about what you would or wouldn't do. But if you were a young teen, because see, Nettie was younger than Celie. Where was she going to go? She didn't have a place to go. So what if Nettie had decided, well, I guess I'm gonna just have to, you know, go ahead and let Mr. have his way.
Every time the subject like this come up, I think of a song by a Louisiana rapper named Vicious, song called Understand. And it's basically like sympathetic to a woman or women who people call hoes for what they're doing, and they're trying to so-called take advantage of men and doing all these things for money because, well, like the woman say in the song, you know, they don't understand. I'm tired of being poor, basically. Very good song.
Well, and we see this is like the never ending rabbit hole of discussing one issue, but then realizing how connected it is to another issue and so on. You know, there was this video that we saw, some social media video, and it was like this man supposedly showing how women are only out for money because this particular woman who had been, why are you laughing?
Because it's ridiculous.
Because she was walking down the street and she was wearing these like Daisy Dukes or whatever that actually had her cheeks out, if you know what I'm saying. And so, of course, the guy is attracted to what he sees and he's like, excuse me, miss, you know, can I talk to you for a minute? You know, in that typical sort of way. Now, to me, when I look at this woman, she's clearly, I don't want to call her a woman of the night, but she's clearly participating in, you know,
he's
money.
Trying to act like he's trying to get with her, like, hey, can I get to know you? And I look at her and I say, are you sure this is the one you want to get to know and all that other stuff?
Well, it's not even like she's there. This is a business to her. But see, to me, when a woman is making it clear what she's about, I mean, this is, as they call it, the oldest profession in the book, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not going to judge that. Like, I could say, hey, for me, it ain't right. I don't want to do it. But I don't know what things in her life may have led her to that point because people come through some pretty horrific things. So I'm not judging that. But what I would say is that it's her doggone body. And if that's what she decided to do, I'd much rather see her benefiting from the, you know, the sweat of her own labor than giving that money to, you know, somebody else who is, quote, managing her. And you know what I mean by those type of male managers.
Most of those videos are fake anyway.
Well, okay. But it certainly it presented a dilemma that that could be real.
Yeah,
right.
It should be like Darman or whoever, and just come out and be like, okay, we're just coming up with situations.
Right. So assuming that, so then this guy continues to talk and she's like, I want the money. You got some money. What you trying to do? And literally she's like, what are you trying to do? And when she says this, she reaches around and grabs her behind and claps her cheeks with her hands to say like, this is what I'm selling. And he's just like, oh, well, you know, you want to talk to me? He's like, why are you about the money and all of this and that? So, you know, it probably was a setup and just to try to prove a point. But I'm like, why are you wasting this lady's time? You know, if you wouldn't be wasting somebody else's time who's selling a thing that you might want.
I think it's kind of the reverse of I'm not selling myself, but buy me all these things and give me money for the maybe the opportunity to be in a relationship, right? From the woman, right? The woman,
because those women are not being straight up about what they want.
All right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All right, so it's similar to that because it would be that the man is he's acting like I just want to get to know you because he wants something for free.
Yes.
Yeah. So
it is the flip side of that. But that was, you know, another point to bring up about the women who pretend to want. They basically just want the money, but they don't want to say that they just want the money.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if it's the oldest profession in the book, those women are professionals and they do that. But there's a part where you really are prostituting yourself, but you don't want to face that that's what you're doing. So then you pretend like you're being in some, and I put respectable in air quotes, you know, some respectable situation when your goal is to get a bill paid or to get $40 on your nightstand after, you know, whatever it is you do with this man and you know what the deal is. But then you even go so far as to say, hey, it's 2024. I don't even have to do anything. So I'm prostituting, but I don't have to, you know, I don't actually have to do anything in return for what it is that I'm promising. So like you are selling, basically selling something and just now you're like, hey, I am going to, under the guise that I'm going to give you this thing, you give me stuff and you wanting all kind of things up front for that. And that has nothing to do with self-respect or anything because, you know, everybody knows that this is the type of woman you are. And to me, I'd rather just, see the person who is straight up because that is being intellectually honest about what you're doing versus, you know, like, so the woman like this lady walking down the street, she's like, hey, you know, you got to give me the money up front because I'm doing a thing. And then you don't even have to be bothered with the man after that. That's just what your preference is, as opposed to lying to other people about what your intentions are as a woman, you know. But yeah, that's just my quick soapbox. But back to Mr. and this situation with Nettie. Let's talk about the poll results because we did go and ask you whether or not it was okay that, you know, that this was the situation. Specifically, the way we asked the question was, given that the film takes place in the early 1900s, do you think it was okay that Nettie and Celie were, quote, underage by today's standards when they went to live with Mr.? This was quite commonplace at the time, so please give your thoughts in the comments. 20% of you said that it was okay. So 1 in 5 of you said that it was just fine that the girls, teenage girls, went to live with this man. You know, one of them is his wife, you know, and whatnot. And then 80% of you said basically, hell to the no. This is not right. What would your answer to this question be?
Was it
right? Was it okay given the times?
Given the times, no, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I would never believe in that if something is wrong today, it's okay in earlier times. It may have been more acceptable at the time. But that doesn't change how I feel about something being wrong.
I 100% agree with you on this. Like, it's absolutely wrong. It was wrong then. It's wrong now. Now, the beauty of today is that more people recognize how wrong it is. But if you don't think that the young women who were pawned off on these dirty old men, so to speak, if you don't think they recognize it in the time when it happened, except they were powerless to do anything to change it, you need to think again because they were. So it's like, if you feel like you can't do anything to change it, you just make the best of it. You accept it. You have this man's children and you're there and, you know, that's what happens. But I want to read some of the comments from you all and we can kind of discuss the comments as we go. Genemo 80 says, I think the movies and books made it clear that Celie was too young, even for the time. And it was also clear that she did not consent. See, consent is also something that's a more nuanced thing. Like, it's crazy to me that it's only in the last 20 or so years that people actually said, oh, maybe a woman or whomever ought to have to consent for a man to have his way. And I'm just trying to say it in a way that, doesn't seem so sexually charged.
Yeah, and we did bring this up in the beginning before we got to the comments. So, yeah, and I don't know. Sometimes when people are analyzing books and films, they're reaching back into their own lives. So it doesn't matter what the book and the movie make clear, but you have to be able to discuss it from both ways, right? The book is saying this, or the work or the author appears to be saying this, versus, okay, on what I just read and hear, this is what I feel is, true. But yeah, they didn't consent.
And that was a huge problem.
Yeah.
Then we have another comment from Vicky who says, we have to remember that normal/expected lynching was normal and expected too. And that's a great point, and that was part of the reason we posed the question the way it did. It's tricky with these questions because I don't want to include our opinions of the matter in the question because we want you to answer like how you really feel, right? And that's absolutely 100% right. Slavery was legal. That didn't make it right. Lynching was normal and expected at the time, and that didn't make it right.
Yeah, but I think that some people think that morality is democratic somehow. If a lot or most people think it's okay, then it's okay. But it's probably just logical fallacies that they're using to try to make an argument to prove their point is, hey, a lot of people like it and it was accepted then, to try to bolster their point. But yeah, that's crazy. No, I don't believe in that.
Yeah. So, I absolutely agree with Vicky on this. So the next one comes from Queen Scarlett Pimp Sunkiss. First of all, hey, Queen, we see you a lot in the comments. And what she said was, hell, MF and nah. That's why it's always upsettingly funny to me when older generations criticize younger generations, because most times the older generations set the younger ones up for failure, be it mindfully or mindlessly, or just doing what was of the times. That was a fool, a shame, and a scandal. A lot of parents like to use their circumstances as excuses, and it can't be excuses. They're explanations, but not excuses. Because even when you are limited in your ability, you still need to be honest and take accountability for your choices in that limitation when it causes generational strife and trauma. It still says a lot about you.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying about our analysis is, explaining why the characters or people do what they do. It's not making an excuse
right
for
or
them.
Justifying the action. It's saying, here's probably the thought pattern. Here's probably what was going on. These are the dynamics. And, life is not always easy, but even if you had to, make decisions because of your circumstance, you got to still own that,
Somewhat, yeah, depending on what it is. Or the circumstance, yeah. So I watched the movie Alive, right? And
oh my gosh,
the new one they made it again.
If y'all don't know what the movie Alive is, it's about they're from Paraguayan soccer team, and they wound up in the mountains and the plane crashed, and then they wind up actually eating some of the people who
booty
had
meat.
the booty meat of the people who had died in the crash thing.
But they redid it. I think it was on Netflix, Society of the Snow, and people were talking about it. And I was like, oh, they don't know about Alive. But yeah, it's a true story, basically.
Yeah, where they basically became cannibals in order to survive as they waited to be rescued.
Yeah, so in a situation like that, hey, that's totally understandable if your morality says never ever eat a human. But some people, they live and die with that stuff, and they just like, I'm not going to do it because it is wrong.
But a lot of things, the pressure makes people compromise all the time in whatever way, which is why I think it's important to kind of when your creeds or your life philosophies are put to the test to really, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where you decide, hey, if what I've been believing is real, if I can really do this thing, or if I can really abstain from this thing or live according to whatever that is, or whether it turns out to be some nonsense, So, from a philosophical perspective, I do think that that's how we should be analyzing our lives,
Yeah.
Another comment, and this is probably the comment that really made me think the most and hit me the hardest. So R. Murray 722 says, I didn't find out until my grandmother's funeral that she was 13 when she married my grandfather and he was 26, pregnant within the first year of marriage. What's even crazier is that he wanted to marry her before, but that my great grandparents said that she was too young and made them wait. But they were together almost 60 years. It's very complicated because up until that point, I always viewed their relationship as couple goals. My grandfather was a provider and always treated my grandmother like a lady. But I can only imagine what those early years must have been like. This young girl married to this grown-ass man. This is the hard part. First of all, none of us know, like if it's your parent or your grandparent, we only know for a fact what happened when we came on the scene.
Yeah.
Our impression of people is based upon, what they have shown us or what we see starting that day.
Just think about it, how people be online just bashing, this man is absolutely disgusting. And my grandfather is the greatest man to ever live, not even knowing.
Yeah, because in a way, I think when it's done, when your people do a good job in a way, like you're supposed to idolize and think that, your parents are great people and you're supposed to think that your grandparents are great people, because that always adds to the stability, of your life as a child. Right. And we take those ideals that we have as a child into our adulthood. And sometimes, the facade cracks. Sometimes and at any point, inevitably, if we get the opportunity to be around our parents, we realize that they are human beings, right? That they just are. But by the time we realize that, hopefully we're adults, so that we can kind of handle realizing that. The problem comes in a lot of cases with dysfunction is when we are forced to face that as a child who doesn't have the means to really cope with, that reality. And
then the parents were seemingly accepting to this, right? Because just think, she's not old enough, but hey, at 13, you're old enough. You've been trained up enough. We decree adulthood on you, basically. Mm-hmm. So that may be a thing, right? Who decides? Should a parent decide once they feel that a child is trained up, right? Or is it this arbitrary age? But then, you have that whole love story, right? Where you have Sally Hemings too. And that's sort of a way where, hey, after the fact, we're like, yeah, look at this beautiful love story. And if you didn't know the nature of their relationship, then you're not kind of looking at it with a side eye.
Right. She was basically a child who was taken advantage of by this older man who also happened to be her half sister's husband. That's just, it's crazy and it's sick. But, people romanticize a lot of this stuff. But when you think about what it actually was, it's like, well, damn. And so to get back to this, I don't think it's complicated, just like the commenter said. It is complicated, but how do we kind of divide how anybody would feel about their grandfather in this situation, how it changes how you see what your grandmother may have endured, right? Because your grandmother after she was well settled into that marriage. They were married 60 years. So you knew the latter part of that, presumably, right?
But do you truly know that she wanted to be there too?
You just don't, because look, if it settles in and, eventually they have a bond that happens because you've been with this man this whole time. And like she said, from what she saw, he wasn't mistreating her. It didn't seem like there was domestic situations going on and all of that. Right. But the question is it in and of itself a problem, whether his intentions are just perfect, that he married a 13-year-old? And I'm asking that more rhetorically because, I have my opinion. But then when that's your grandfather and your grandmother.
And what makes it so-called nasty, right? What makes these relationships so repugnant? I think has to play a part into it because like one's 13, one's 18, 19. You know what I'm saying? It's it that whatever manipulation or who knows what, that ain't for me to answer, right? But that's just kind of what I think of because like when are you able to choose, right? Because some people may say 40 something, early 20s is a little too much, right? That just that this spread of age is an issue.
Well, and gender, who's the oldest one, right? Because right now there's this controversy going on because Drea from Basketball Wives is pregnant by, I think the guy is 22, he's a basketball player, and she's 39. So you got almost a 20-year age difference between you, and they're talking basically about how and she's got a son that's his age.
That she's taking advantage of him.
That she's taking advantage of him, you know, and I, listening to this, would tend to agree. And it's one point that they do bring up in that article that I talked about. And that point is when we get into the question of whether it is wrong or how it's wrong. When they look at what they would call child brides, hey, look, if a child bride is 17 and she marries another 17-year-old, that's in their minds not problematic because they're just youth. You know, it might be a stupid idea because maybe people think they're too young, but they're just youthful, right? But if the man, if it's a girl, and more likely than not, it's typically usually a girl who is the younger party, the child bride, as opposed to the reverse. So if she's 17 and he's 35, okay.
Yeah.
And this is part of some of the issue with people when they talk about Beyonce and Jay-Z, just to put it out there, right? He was much older than she was. And when you have that age gap, then people start to go, okay, realistically, why are you interested in this young girl?
Yeah.
Why? You know? So that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one because then you have to decide at what point is it close enough. And then you get into it being very arbitrary again, where, okay, 4 years is good enough. If you're within 4 years, then you kind of the same.
Right. And but I would say the younger you are, the more that age difference matters, right? Yeah. So, but the older you 20 years when you're 40 and he's 60, doesn't matter as much, right? Because you're both fully grown people. But 10 years, if you're, if I would say if you're 15 and he's 25, those 10 years matter a whole heck of a lot. But that article points to another thing. Back in the day, they claim that many people did not know their exact age. So part of yourself, of who you thought of yourself as, was not based on knowing your exact age. It was based on, like you just pointed to, this idea of maturity happening when people deemed it was so, right?
And
when
then
they say you seem mature enough.
How do you measure it? Like, say, from one of the parties, do the part of it is what you don't know what the person thinks, right? Does the person think that this person feels mature? Or if you like, yeah, I just want a little young one, there's a difference there too.
And if you look historically, those ages are gonna, if you think about responsibility and traditional gender roles, all right, the woman can be much younger because at a younger age, you can still be competent at cleaning and doing whatever.
Well,
and if you're if you have been
father, right?
Yeah. And if you're beyond puberty, you also can presumably bear children. Now, of course, we know about the complications of if you're, technically can bear, but your body can't handle it and all that. But what I'm saying is that happens for a woman much younger, whereas the responsibilities that would be on a male, on a husband would be to provide and whatever. Well, he probably may not be able to do that at 13, right? To take care of his family or any children that he brings into the world. And I'm talking about historically, not like what's happening today. But I would say it's, women and men are almost equally, if you look at the gender gap in pay, but, almost equally able to do kind of those similar things. And of course, none of this accounts for your mental age.
That's why you got to have to put all those things together, like I was saying earlier, because let's say you do have children get married, right, to each other, or the reverse. So if you have a boy who is 13, 14, he has a child or a family he can't take care of them because you can't even legally get a job.
Mm-hmm.
But 100 years ago, you could, and that's going to play into, that sort of thing of who deciding if you can take care of kids, if you can be. It shapes what people think a responsible person is, because you haven't had any responsibility at that age because you weren't even allowed to.
Right. Well, here's the question that I have for the people in the comments, because, I know many people have, claim to have been out on their own since they were 15 or 16 or, an age that I look at and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Like, how did you take care of yourself? And the question I always have is like, how did you rent an apartment at that age? Or, just how did you get through the basic things without a parental signature and guidance and all of that? To be, to just do the typical things. Like, how did y'all rent your apartment? Let us know in the comments, about stuff like that. Because I do wonder.
Think about it. You could go to people and say, I have money, and here, take this money, right? And if it's the job is the issue, then I'm doing illegal things. If I'm a girl, just imagine what I'm doing. If I'm a male, just imagine what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to that. But I guess when you get around 16 or whatever, 15, 16, then you just work. But hey, you got to be working through these certain hours.
Yeah. The people who I knew, like any of my friends who might have been, became mothers, at 15, 16, they all still lived with their parents, so it wasn't like they were like, yes, I am a full adult and I have my apartment and everything. But this brings me to a question that when we were out on our walk not that long ago, we discussed in great detail, which is this idea of, okay, if becoming a parent is what definitely makes you an adult in the eyes of, let's say, the law, like if you become a parent at, I don't know, 15, and you can make decisions for your child, right? At that age, you're making decisions about somebody else's life. But what about the weird thing of you still can't do certain things that say you're an adult at that age, right? You can have a kid and determine if they should get their vaccinations or they shouldn't, or, whatever it is, you're controlling this other person's life and responsible for somebody's life, but they're not even allowing you to be responsible for your own, technically, legally, right?
Right.
How, that's just a weird dynamic to me.
That's just how it goes.
I can't buy liquor, but I can decide if I'm going to, take care of this kid or whatever.
Yeah,
I'm entrusted
I decide
with the
what
kid's
this
life.
kid can ingest.
Yeah, it's just very weird. And I posed the question. I said, well, all right, if your parent is still your legal guardian, even when you have a child, right? Then why isn't, and I'm not saying this is how it should be. I don't actually think this is how it should be. But by that logic, which I think is flawed logic, by that same logic, then how come the parent isn't automatically in charge of the child
guardian
you have when you're under age?
Yeah. Yeah.
Go to the comments and let us know. Again, I'm not saying I think that's how it should be, but the flawed logic of what makes you an adult versus what makes you not an adult, and what how, if I can't be legally responsible for my own life, then when I have a child and I'm not of age, then I can, be in charge of the kid. I can't even be in charge of myself. Just weird. But maybe there's something I really don't know. Like maybe the practical application of this, in the real world is just very different. I admit I don't have a whole lot of experience in that area, but just kind of speaking on the philosophy and logic of it, it just seems weird. So back to Celie and Nettie and, all of that. Let's get back to your comments. And this comment by BB3 says, this is still normal, and I work in an urban school. These girls have grown men as boyfriends, baby daddies, by the time they are in 11th grade. They think they are grown at an early age these days, I guess. Well,
I don't know about it just these days.
Because it's been like this, right?
Yeah.
It was like this when I was growing up. Girls had, in your high school with boyfriends who were 25.
Yeah, so when you get to that age, I do think everyone believes that, okay, I grew to this age, I have opinions on the world and everything, and I am old enough to make decisions. And I don't think the people are necessarily wrong in that idea that you can, because there comes a time when I talk to, when I talk to some people, it still seems as though they're 13, 14, right? In their ideas and everything. And I'm like, yeah, because you're probably forming who you're going to be around that time when you get over the hump of just knowing what it is to be a person, right? Like how to put my clothes on and how to, not manipulate, how to travel throughout the world. I know where places are. I know that you use money to buy things. Like other than that, really, what do you gain besides extras, right? Now I figure out how I can make more money than other people.
Well, what I do like about this comment is the pointing out that it's happening today. Like it wasn't just Celie, it's happening today. But then these girls, who have the grown men boyfriend, Queen, I think it's Queen Maya, responds and says they were groomed and preyed upon, sis. And I think it's important to acknowledge that even though you may agree, right, you at that age, you are ripe for exploitation.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say that's 100% of the situation, but there's a chance that if you got this old man running game on you, you are just an easy mark.
Yeah, I think we're looking at economy and stuff. It's kind of like what Mr. was doing. He's on the horse presenting himself, right, to her. I show up in my car, you know what I'm saying? The dude show up in his car dressed in certain brands and certain fashions and enticing the girls, right? But also with, the capitalism and everything, it's what is your situation like at home? Are your parents there to be able to say this is wrong or not and know what you're doing, because they may just be spending their time working, just trying to provide food and shelter.
Right. And so if you do have a parent who is able to kind of be on top of you as a child, because, no matter what, when you get to be that age, I think of myself in high school. I thought in my mind that I was grown, even though, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I really thought I had it all together in my head, but thank goodness my mother was like, we not even doing, you don't need to do. So I still had those bumpers, but what if she had to work all the time and wasn't available to just be keeping an eye out for my shenanigans as a teen?
No, and then, knowing who they're talking to and stuff, right? You got instant messaging on many different apps.
Yeah.
You got whatever, phone calls, and just having a device with you all the time. You're not just on the house phone where your mama or your daddy could pick up the phone and be like, who's on the phone? Because
I'm telling you, back in the day, my mama wouldn't hesitate to pick up the phone. She would not hesitate. I remember there's this guy. I was barely in high school at this point, which would have made me around 14. And he was like 25. And, I was just like, this guy's interested in me. You're flattered because you're young. And I'm sure that looking back on the grown me, I was like, oh, man, he was trying to make an easy mark. But when I tell you my mama was like a hawk, and I'm on the phone, this guy called and he asked for me. And my mother was like, excuse, she was like, your voice is a little too deep. How old are you? And when I tell you she ran that man off, right? Because, if you're in high school, you might get a call from, I call him a little boy now, but, at the time, somebody who's your same age, a little 15-year-old boy calling, and, their voice might still be a little squeaky. Like this dude was a grown man who had no business sniffing around a 15-year-old. Okay. But my mother was right there and she picked up that phone. See, y'all, if you're too young to remember when people had house phones, because some of y'all are quite young. We didn't have a cell phone. I can't imagine what it's like for a teenage, to be a parent of a teenager today.
You have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
Well, it's possible to not know what they're doing. But what about the idea of this being normal? She says this is still normal, and I work in an urban school. I think it's kind of that economy, same sort of thing. And having the autonomy as a child, too. Because we kind of had it, right? You call them I used latchkey kids.
Latchkey,
right?
Yeah, I was a latchkey kid.
So you kind of had that, but yeah, people just making their own decisions, and it being, is it from the, we'll say, men perspective, as she mentioned, is that normalized where, oh yeah, my girl goes to whatever size school, but how old is grown men too?
Okay, so like in this case of this guy, if my memory serves me correct, and luckily my mom, cut it off. So I never really got an opportunity to even interact with this guy or this man. But, because I'm young, and she got on that phone and was like, listen, and started threatening him with legal action if he continued, right? So he just, absconded off into the darkness. But what if it was a situation that was different? I kind of forgot.
Yeah. But so the thing is, so with the men, we'll call them, if what's going on with their circle of friends, right?
Well, I think they don't admit it, right? So if you have a girl, listen, if you know the girl is young, but can you tell the difference between...
Where you going? I'm going to Booker T. Washington High because I got to go pick up...
They ain't going to tell you that. The girl just might be brought around you.
I don't know.
And can you tell the difference between 15 and 18?
Yeah, no.
I don't think you really can. She's young, but you're trying to assume maybe the best of your friend to know that you're not thinking this girl is underage.
Let's go with 11th grade. She said 11th grade. That's probably 16. Yeah, let's just say 16.
Yeah.
So you probably can't tell.
Yeah.
But so then we have that age gap thing. Are they 19, 20? Because the difference between 13 and 17 is different than 16 and 20 too. And it could be somebody who you were in school with, right? You may have an 11th grader with a 9th grader, and then they graduate, and then you have the 11th grader and a 19-year-old, or
and that was the complexity, I think, for when I went to high school, because I technically went to a high school in 7th grade. So there's like guys at this school that are 6 years older.
Dang.
And they tried to keep us segregated, but we still had classes. Potentially, like if we were taking a foreign language class or something, we potentially had classes with guys who were 6 years older, essentially, because you could be 18,
yeah.
Right? And so, and I mean, this is somebody you're seeing every day in school, and then you're young and you're impressionable. And I mean, I remember at the time there were girls at that age who were trying to get those guys.
She went to the school R. Kelly was hanging around after he graduated.
When this person commented this, I immediately thought about that at that.
R. Kelly was lurking around her high school.
I immediately thought about it at the time, right? Because it was common when I was in high school. Girls, their boyfriends would be grown, like this person says, picking them up, waiting outside the school in their car. And see, the guys that are our same age, they can't compete with that. Not unless their parents gave them a car, which was, maybe the minority of people, and maybe junior or senior year. First off, you got to be old enough to drive. So, you got to be old enough to drive, and your parents or you got to be willing to foot the bill for the insurance, right? And you a 16-year-old male driver, the insurance is going to cost more than a car note.
Yeah.
So, so there's all of that. And I mean, it's all complicated. It's all very complicated. What do you say for the men who were interested, but they weren't just trying to take advantage, but they actually happen to love somebody who's younger, Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Because,
I'm not, yeah.
Like when I was saying like, okay, the difference in age and one of the things comes up. So what do you talk about? Well, we watched the show on Netflix, right? Could be a conversation. Oh, I seen that show too. Because when I talk to people and I was saying like their age, it just seems like they're still this age. The depth of conversation isn't even there. So to say that, oh, they don't have anything to talk about is probably just, they probably got a lot of stuff that they have in common, watching the same gossip stuff and,
you on the same wavelength.
Yeah, you're not talking about politics, world affairs, or none of that stuff. You probably, that's just how it goes. Like,
yeah. So that's the situation. When you look at it, it's complicated. I think the easy answer is to be like, this is sick and this is terrible and there are no exceptions to this. Because if we look historically, not every woman who married young was unhappy with that decision and had a horrible life. Like,
they all end tragically too? Right.
And the commenter who talked about the grandmother, we know based on the stories that the grandfather really loved her, but we assume she really loved him, but clearly at some point in the future she grew to love him. I know somebody's going to be like, Stockholm syndrome or something.
That story puts you in a real situation, or when you when it's not, you can claim to be objective, right? But somebody who is in that situation, like these are my grandparents, that makes it tough.
Yeah, and then you're like, this in your mind, this was couple goals. I saw my grandfather treat
I've
my
been knowing
grandmother
them for
well.
45 years.
Yeah, I've known them all of my life, and they seem like wonderful people, and they may well be. You know that I'm. It is not impossible that that's how they came together, but that they loved each other very much. It's not impossible for people with those kinds of age gaps at that age to love each other. What I would say in the modern time is that you got to give the younger person a chance to grow up. So, at that age, whatever the age gap was, 10, 12 years, at 13, like that's too much. I'd even say if it was 20 and 33, that's probably in modern times still too much. But, when a person starts getting 25 to 30, then, age gaps matter less. You're kind of getting to be more of who you are. You're like getting more fully grown. But you're talking about doing stuff at a time where people their brains ain't even fully formed, male or female. But we have to ask these questions more so for the girls because they tend to be the younger ones in those situations. Okay, Jamal, also a long time commenter and viewer on the channel. Good to see you again. Jamal says, I don't condone the behavior. I will start there. But during the Reconstruction era of this movie, women were almost regarded as livestock. So once they were, quote, breeding age, they were considered, quote, women. And really to this day, you see African-American celebrities face harsher backlash for being with minors compared to Caucasian celebrities.
Okay, Jamal, I gotta make fun of you, bro. You call this the Reconstruction era. I think that's denoting the period after the Civil War, right? But a lot of people do say that this is basically like a slave movie, or somebody said, what was the phrase they used? It was like on the cusp of the silver of slavery or something.
Yeah, they said
I forgot the term they use. But I think a lot of people look at this like
they
this
said
is
a holdover from slavery.
Yeah.
Past. Indigo Wisdom said that.
Yeah, so I think that just when we saw this, we see this as so long ago. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's just our impression of what the world was, that it was so close to slavery. But yeah, I get what you're saying on the Reconstruction era of this movie. But yeah, that's how, women and children basically like, hey, you child, you come over here, go in this coal mine and come out with some coal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it just, and to his point about women regarded as livestock, I mean, pretty much what happened to Celie and Nettie was they were traded in such a way, right? Like, what you want doesn't matter, and you were handed off from your father to this man.
Yeah.
Like, just basically sold away.
Okay, so the idea that black celebs face harsher backlash than Caucasians, right? Is it from a legal standpoint, or is it just from, the public interest, I guess?
Well, I really think that this is about, like you brought him up earlier, kind of like how R. Kelly is in prison, but there were other white counterparts or whatever in music who didn't have that outcome.
That means we were successful, right? So if it's wrong, it's wrong, right? And the black community demands that when something happened to our girls, that something should happen to the people, right? Or, you know what I'm saying? I guess that would be the R. Kelly, but even though Cosby would be a little different, right? Mm-hmm. But are you in the black world too? Do we know what happened in the other communities? Or is it that I just know what's going on with the black folks because, I'm black? But yeah, I do think shouldn't that be commended? Because it's kind of like when people say, oh, the gays, when something happened to them, then people getting canceled and stuff. Yes, because they demand it, right? Mm-hmm. So if we demand that somebody is taking advantage of our people and our girls, then something should happen to them. Then how we look at it, well, it's bad that there was consequences for a black person.
Right. And that is really how the more recent cases against him came to be, because a certain part of the community decided that, no, we are not taking this. And
it's going on too long.
Yeah, it has gone on too long, and we're putting an end to it. He will not do this anymore. And I just will say that that case was very complex in my opinion, but there's enough evidence there that seems to support that, he had participated in things which were quite repugnant. But I think also people tend to conflate, because when you commit so many different types, it wasn't just underage. It was, people who weren't underage. And then, they had you want to lump it all into one basket. I feel like this: if you're technically legally grown and you go and you decide to participate and do things and whatever, like, let's just say it was, because, at one point they were saying cult, right? If it was a cult and you are grown and you decided to be there, that it is not illegal to be in a cult. It is not illegal to be a cult leader. That is not illegal. But we want to roll that into the stuff with these, girls. With
the other stuff. Yeah, to try to bolster the case.
That would be, Yeah, part
of the problem with that is, too, because when you look at it as a legal standpoint, when we're not talking about just celebrities, we look at the punishments, right? And how they're doled out based on race, right? But then to say that is wrong, then to say, hey, let's bolster the case and make it look more wrong, kind of unjustifiably, so that there is punishment, it's kind of working on that same end.
Or let's look at, let's say legally, to bringing multiple, like almost collusion, right? To bring multiple cases at the same time where a person can't even defend, and I shudder at this because technically we see that happening in a number of different areas. But the difference is, if I don't like that person, we have a tendency to say it's okay that their rights be violated or that the gang be played dirty against them. But if I'm being completely intellectually honest, I would say that if you are accused of a crime, that you should have, it should be your prosecution should be fair. It shouldn't be the deck is stacked against you and things are made where you can't even, as a millionaire, a multimillionaire, barely defend yourself because all of the legal stuff that has amassed. And I just hate that I'm even saying this at this point with this election coming up.
Well, if you allow it for and praise it for the guilty, then it will be used against the innocent and the less guilty, right? Oh, all they did was steal a bag of chips. Why is the punishment so harsh? Because you promoted being treated unfairly in such a way for someone who you thought was guilty. So now they just gonna use it for whatever.
Well, I mean, in another case that just happened, which will kind of remind you, that would be the case of Nature Boy and Carbon Nation. Nature Boy in the last couple weeks was just sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for essentially
something that gets you about 15 years usually. You know what I'm saying? 15, 30 years. That's like, no, life without the That's
crazy to me.
It's very crazy.
That is very crazy.
People accept it because, hey, I hate him. I hate what he did.
Exactly.
And then those harsh penalties are just going to be doled out on innocent people and people who haven't done such egregious things, and maybe even done things that you agree with, like smoking weed.
Yeah. See, and that's the part about trying to be as objective as possible in your analysis of these cases. But when I heard that he got life in prison without the possibility of parole, that was just
I was just like, he gonna be found guilty. But dang, when I heard that sentence, I'm like, what is going on?
And then, but this is just the disparity I feel, for us within the criminal justice system. We already know that that's jacked up for us. So anyway, but that's kind of, that's my response when I read Jamal's, where I think he was pointing at. Then Wolf says,
"Why is this so small?"
No, this happens all the time. Okay, so you're just basically saying it's cool because it happens all the time.
Yeah.
To which we've already discussed the logic of, okay, a lot of things happen all the time, but does that make it right? Is it okay that it happened then because it happens all the time? Yeah.
Innocent people go to jail all the time, and some of them for life. That is how it extends.
Yeah. So Chrissy B99 says, I say yes, because essentially they are portraying what occurred at this time. So to be as relatable / accurate to the times, having them be that age makes sense. However, in terms of morality, in real life applications, I don't think this is right. They were children, and with Celie in particular, she is a child raising children, which is crazy. I don't necessarily have a problem with relationships with large age gaps, but I do have a problem if they are underage.
Yeah.
So I completely agree. I agree with that. And then I think the whole reason that it was chosen that Celie and Nettie were underage was because that's part of the story, right? That's part of the, but that's just part of what makes this situation so terrible.
How they showed it in the 1985 version is that we gonna show you them being absolute children. Right.
Playing patty cake type games, hand games.
Oh my!
While he is, while he is looking from behind his newspaper, just being a dirty dog.
Yeah, because they had to make it clear, like for the time in 1985, these are kids and this is wrong. So, so you have no question about whether or not it was wrong back then.
Yep.
And those are just little techniques because you have this ability for the current times to portray it however you want to portray it. And you can be like, because if you make a film about how this was wrong in the early 1900s, it's going to be totally different than in the late 1900s. That's crazy. I'm calling it the 1900s. Though.
True. All right. So those were all of your comments. We always appreciate comments, and make sure you're commenting on videos with your thoughts, because you never know when we're going to pull those comments and then include them and discuss them in these types of discussions that we like to have, because these movies make us think of things that we ought to be talking about as a community, as a channel, all of that stuff. So I really enjoy going back and forth and the things that you guys make us think of when you're responding and posing scenarios and questions. And
yeah,
I
and we do read all of these comments. Cheri reads more than I do.
Yes.
But we be reading all these comments.
And I appreciate that you share personal things. Like I said, the commenter who talked about her grandmother being 13 when she got married, it just really makes me think.
You win comment of the series with that one.
Yes, we appreciate that.
Ironically, you were just so lucky to be in that situation that you win comment of the series. But yeah.
So another thing you should know is that we have done a great series, and we have a wonderful playlist, which is linked in the description, with all of our discussions and breakdowns from The Color Purple, the scenarios, the questions we have. There'll be more to come. If you have suggestions on stuff you want us to talk about with The Color Purple, whether that's the 2023 version or the original 1985 version, which we all love so much.
If you made it this far into this nice long video, type "no sir" in the comments so we'll know you're one of the real ones who stick around.
Thank you so much, and be sure to check out the video that's on the screen right now.